The Packers play the Colts in preseason game number 2 today. We will tell you who's going to need to impress to make this roster. We also review Thursday's joint practice with the Colts. Let's go.
I've been wanting this shit forever. I've been in the field with whatever they throw at me. Brush it off, pick myself up, moving on to the better. Hey. Ain't no errors, baby, it's a new era. I wake up early feeling rich like I'm
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Sounds Gouda. My name is Jordan Olson and my co-host and best friend over here is Rob Ralph. We're back. It's Saturday. We have another Packers preseason game, and we are excited for that, as you can tell. Thanks to all of our listeners, especially any new listeners to the channel. Hopefully you like what you hear, and you give us a subscribe, like, follow, comment. Let us know what you think. We do have new episodes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast every Wednesday and Saturday. So, we're still doing our every 50 subscribers promo on YouTube. So be a public subscriber. Once we get to 600, we're going to be raffling away some swag. Also new on our channel, we've unlocked the super chats, the super stickers, and super thanks. So if we're live, you'll be able to use those super chats and super stickers. It's just another way for you to interact with us and support our channels. Feel free to check that out if you'd like. Preseason flow again. We're here doing game previews. After the game, we'll give you our reactions on Wednesdays right now and our 53-man roster updates. Expect next one to heat up after seeing a lot of these number twos and cut down players get some more extensive time today. And we're still working on getting some guests. We've got a couple people coming down the pipeline, whether they happen before the preseason or next week. We're going to have some other people in here talking Packers ball. So let's start with the joint practice just for a few minutes, and then we'll get into the game preview. So that happened on Thursday, Rob. What were some of the things that were notable to you from joint practice and some of the storylines that we should be looking for going into the game today?
Well, the injured people, a lot of injuries still, right? No Love, Reed, Wicks, Dobbs, Williams, Hobbs, McKinney, almost the full entire Packers roster. Not really, but just mostly everybody.
But you could say most of the wide receivers and a good portion of your secondary.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Relatively low key practice for the most part. I got in some tuffles. Kraft got into it with Hunter Roller after a hit on Golden. Packers secondary did struggle in one-on-ones versus Colt wide receivers, but also Colts wide receivers also got them too for some of our one-on-ones too as well. So main takeaway, and I'm sure you heard it from some of the beat writers and some other Packers podcasts too as well, but it was a dominant defensive performance from both defenses, from both starting defense and the Packers starting defense. So for the Packers, 9 sacks in total. Lucas Van Ness is continuing to shine and put some more pass rush tools to his tool set, which is really good to see. Gary was in there too for a sack. Simmons, Nixon, and Baldwin Hall had interceptions and were ball hawks. And then Bullard, having a forced fumble. So pretty dominant day by the defense. The both opposing offenses couldn't really do much. Not that that's too much of a shock or some of the vanilla play calls, I'm sure, but the offenses were a little bit stagnant as far as that goes. And then Matthew Golden, I've already seen a couple of those clips trending online of him cutting up cornerbacks Alex Johnson and Chardavius Ward, but he sure does look the part. So it just builds on the hype for Matthew Golden. So those are few of the things that stood out to me. Jordan, anything that you want to touch on? Or
you hit a lot of the main topics now that we're a few days out from that period. I think the emphasis on joint practices is really interesting, right? Most of the time, at least for the Packers, they do not play their starters coming out of a joint practice. Maybe next week when they have their joint practice against the Seahawks, they may decide to play their starters for a period of time, but typically in this week 2 preseason period, they rest a lot of their starters because they feel like these reps, they're safer and almost as meaningful as that preseason activity for players that they kind of have a good idea what to expect of anyways. A couple other things, we're going to see Malik Willis in this game. I know that he struggled a little bit with the ones in team period during joint practice. He seemed to kind of be off a little bit. I think he overthrew Kraft and, really, I think he went like 4 and out on that initial first team period. So seems reminiscent of last week's preseason game. So can the Packers finally kind of get into a rhythm, even though it's not Jordan Love, even though it's not a lot of the other starters, and kind of get the ball moving downfield? I think that will be really important to see. I guess just a couple other things from joint practices. I think there was some comments made from Brian Gutekunst that pretty much alluded to John Williams and Colin Oliver seemed almost destined to start the season on the PUP list. That's kind of what we were talking about when we did our 53-man roster prediction in our last episode, so check that out if you haven't checked that out yet. But I think that's just going to be a great way for them to, stash those players, protect them from the cut down and subjecting them to waivers and some tough decisions. And as they progress through their rookie season, hopefully they get a chance. I think Colin Oliver's got a better chance to make it out this season. It sounds like John Williams' situation is a little bit more serious, so who knows? He may just redshirt his whole rookie season. So I didn't have too much else. So let's just jump into the Colts game preview, which is probably why a lot of you are here today. I'm kind of already alluded to the biggest thing I want to see is for this team offensively to establish rhythm. The other thing that's just more of a necessity is the Packers can't afford to have any more substantial injuries, and they need to come out of this game relatively healthy. We're getting close to the regular season, and any significant injuries right now are going to mean time missed and probably week 1 and week 2 with those games being so close to each other's. I don't know. What are some of the things that you're looking for in today's game? Whether it's some matchups, players on the Colts that you're excited to see, things from the Packers units. What do you got that you're looking at, Rob?
Yeah, well, I think, just knowing from last year, the Malik Willis type of offense, they have a really good opportunity if they are going to, depending on who they're going to be playing on defense, if they are going to be playing their starters against that number 1 starting defense to really, I hope that they can establish the run pretty good, even with some of these backup offensive linemen and Amir Johnson and Abu Kanda in there too as well. So I expect them to try and establish that run early with Malik Willis, just what you saw a lot of from last year, and then kind of, off top of that, have some good play action if they're able to have some success with that for some of these other wide receivers and kind of just see who can come out of the pack. Hardman, I'm interested to see what happens with McCole Hardman and how he kind of bounces back. I'm sure they're going to be putting him in the same situations. If I were to be a betting man, I would say that he would. So that'll be one I'll be looking at, along with Heath, Shepard, Cornelius Johnson, etc. for some of those, Naylor, right? And some of those other wide receivers I'll be taking a look at too. Isaiah Simmons, he probably had the worst game last week too against the Jets. Seemed to have a much better joint practice here on Thursday when we're talking about this. And made some really good plays too. So I'm expecting a couple of bounce back performances from those two, but there's more than a few things. The backup cornerback room too as well.
Hey, Rob, before we jump in on some of that stuff, can I backtrack? I have a different feeling about the Malik Willis of all in this game. And I do think that probably in the regular season that Matt LaFleur made game plan for him to use his legs a little bit more. But I think if you think about how everything went down last season, I think he was with the Packers for less than 2 weeks before he had to start against, was it the Colts? Was that his first game? And then it was the Titans afterwards, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think almost out of necessity, they needed to use his legs pretty heavily in those 2 games because he didn't know the full playbook yet, and obviously it was a weapon. I would expect them to want to show a little bit more in the passing game and have him get a little bit more comfortable there now that he's a full year into this system. That's probably also a little bit more reminiscent of preparing some of these players that are number 2s to playing in the Jordan Love style of offense. So I think it'll be a little bit of a petri dish to see how much he can trust Malik Willis in the playbook that he calls for Jordan Love, or does he really need to, when, have basically a second, play sheet for when Malik Willis comes into the game, and spend extensive time at practice each week, making sure that they have that, that preparation done in case of injury mid-game. So I don't know. That's just kind of my take. Not that they're not going to let him run once or twice, but I think they're gonna try to mold him into more of the normal Jordan Love type of offense. But hopefully we'll see some RPOs and some things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a really good point. And, anybody listening to, let us know your comments and your thoughts, and what you think that that we're gonna see from this offense, because I think both can be right, or maybe it's a mixture of both. But yeah, definitely, if you want to see who would come out, what Malik Willis has in his arm, and to know more of what he has an extension of this playbook, I could absolutely see that too. So
Yeah. We'll get back to those defensive battles you're talking about, because I do want to spend some more time having some discussion about the secondary, I think. But how excited are you to see Marshawn Lloyd? This is really our first potential chance to get an extensive look at Marshawn Lloyd, and I don't know how many snaps he's gonna get, but I am salivating at the mouth to watch even 10 Marshawn Lloyd snaps if I can see him in a Packers uniform on TV running plays. The early indications from this week, when he's been back, he's looked explosive. So
yeah,
I'm excited about that.
100%. I mean, another shameless plug too. You can go back a few videos from a month and some change ago, watch Marshawn Lloyd, if he's going to be the X factor this year for the Packers. We did a deep dive on Marshawn Lloyd and what he can bring to this team. Yeah, depending on how much he plays, I'm very, very excited. And also, if he could just stay healthy, that would be first and foremost. Seems like all the bad luck for him, as far as the football gods go, for injuries, has been kind of hitting him in his time here so far with the Packers. But yeah, especially against backup offensive line for the most part, against this Colts #1 defense that really put a stifle on them today in joint practice. Yeah, I'd be really teeing up here on Marshawn Lloyd to see what we get from him.
Do you think that I'm curious how the offensive line is going to shake out in this game, right? We were talking about this a little on the pre-pod. Rasheed Walker just got back to practice. So, you could definitely see him not playing much, one, trying to stay healthy, but, technically he's the incumbent starter. But that is supposedly a open competition right now. So I wonder if you will see a little bit of Rasheed Walker, or if it's just going to be Jordan Morgan in there the whole time. If Walker doesn't play, could we presume as fans that he still has a hold on that #1 position? Because I think Jordan Morgan's going to play some regardless. Just to continue to prepare him. Rasheed Walker is a little bit more battle tested, obviously. But then the other interesting one will be Deshaun Ryan, even though he's the incumbent starter at guard. Does he start the game as a couple series as the center? Because that seems to be the backup plan for the #2 line right now, is to have Ryan come in for Jenkins if there's an injury there. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I could see that if he's healthy, he might get some snaps or a series or two. Rasheed Walker, that is. But honestly, I'm not too sure. I mean, especially in the last game too, Morgan he had a very, very solid game as well. So I mean, I'm sure that the Packers would love for Morgan, to win that competition. Makes it a little bit easier, right, with Rasheed Walker for next year. But yeah, it would be Morgan, probably Jennings, and then that backup center, if that's Ryan, if that's Monk. So we'll just assume that it's Sean Ryan here, and then Jacob Monk at right guard, and then the other shining one that I'll be kind of teeing up on too, especially for any of those run plays, Marshawn Lloyd, Johnson, Apiconda, to Mr. Pancake Anthony Belton, who had a really, really, really good start against the Jets in last preseason game too. So excited to see what we have there. And then even some of this backup, competition. Telfort Cooper, Lippy, Hill, Smith, and Banks too. So definitely will be teeing up some of this offensive line watch too, and see if they can get any push on this dominant Colts defensive line.
I found it interesting in the last preseason game that Hill was like out of this list of players after Telfort, Cooper, Lippy, Smith, Banks, Hill was like the first one in and, got the most run with like what would probably be the threes or, even he fit in there with the twos for a minute. So I don't know if they just liked him as like the third right guard option on this team or, if it's somebody else in there, it might have been nothing. But if Hill's the first guy up after that group of Morgan, Jennings, Ryan, Monk, and Belton, he may be on his way to being considered as a ninth or 10th offensive lineman on this 53. If not, you'd certainly think that they'd be trying to get him on their practice squad at that point in time. I don't know. I've been high on Cooper. I'd like to see him get some snaps, but I'm pulling for Jacob Monk, and I'd really like to see him have a bounce back game. So now I know we've talked plenty about the offense. I know you're ready to talk about the defense because that's your favorite, Rob. So I brought us back to Malik Willis, but you were going to talk about the secondary a little bit. So let's jump back into your thoughts there.
Yeah, well, I mean, Bo Melton, right? Ballantyne, Haddon, King, and Robinson. Very, very excited to see who comes out of the pack as far as that goes. So that should be an interesting competition, specifically for the Haddon, King, and Robinson kind of conversation of it all. Linebackers already touched on it, but Isaiah Simmons will really be teeing up on that. And then Tyron Hopper is continuing to ascend this year, and even from last week's game. But also, Jamin Johnson and Christian Welch here too as well. I'll be excited to see how they operate and how well they do. Some of this backup edge competition, I mean, I'll be teeing up some Sorrell snaps as well to see if he can continue what he did from last week. And then you shore that up with Cox Jr., Enigbari, and the speedster Aaron Mosby too. So we'll be teeing up as far as that goes and see how this edge room performs. Some of the best safeties, Brown and Baldwin, see how they operate. And then, the defensive tackles, again, I'll be the most interested in Brinson and Stackhouse, but also a big emphasis on Colby Wooden to see if his trend continues to keep going up from training camp and even from last week in the Jets game.
Yeah, some guys that I'm looking at particular, I do really hope that Tyron Hopper continues to emerge. Not that I don't, want Isaiah Simmons or, Christian Welch or anybody to make this roster, but, we've seen some really positive signs from him, and you did invest a third-round selection in him a year ago. So, to maybe see him take reins of, that linebacker 4 position, maybe at some point in time this season, safely secure a spot on this team. I think that would go a lot in Goody's bank of like, hey, that's a player that we didn't totally whiff on, that a lot of you said, hey, like, what are you doing? That was a huge stretch at that point in time in the draft, because that was definitely and has been the narrative up until very recently. So, Brinson, Stackhouse, Wooden, and Brooks, I find to be like a very interesting battle too, right? Like we know that we know that Kenny Clark and why am I blanking on our other starter, Devontae Wyatt. Sorry, folks, it is like after 11 o'clock my time here as we're recording this, but Devontae Wyatt and Kenny Clark are safe there, right? But if they're going to keep 5 guys, essentially these 4 are battling for those 3 spots. They've all got something different that they bring to the table. I have been a big supporter of Carl Brooks. He had a little bit of a down season last year. He had 1 or 2 plays that were pretty memorable, but overall, not really flashing as much as he did as a rookie. You've got Colby Wooden, who's coming on really like the strongest of his career yet. We haven't seen much in regular season. And then you got these 2 rookies, right? One a 6th round selection that you probably want to keep. Somebody that's like one of your only true like 5 techs on this team, and then you've got the very unique Stackhouse, which is probably like your true and best 1 tech on this team. A little less versatility there. So those 4 are going to get a lot of playing time. And I think what's put on tape in this game is going to go a long ways towards a tough decision that's going to be made in a couple short weeks here.
Is there anybody over here on the Colts side that you're looking out for?
I'll just be excited to see some of those rookies that, we, talked a lot about in the pre-draft. I do think Tyler Warren is going to be a good NFL player. I think my observation of him is he's a little slow for the NFL. I think the last time that we saw that was Michael Mayer, right? He hasn't really panned out as a great tight end in this league yet for the Raiders. I do think Tyler Warren is a little bit more versatility than Michael Mayer.
It's a good comp.
Yeah. JT Talamalo, too, was a player that on this show we banged the drum for over and over again as a potential, 2nd round pick. He went to the 2nd round in the Colts. That's all going to be irrelevant if Lucas Van Ness is as good and strong as he's been coming on this camp. So, but it'll be interesting to see him and kind of track his career. And then former Badger Hunter Wooler, who apparently Matthew Golden's getting into it. It's just nice to see Badgers sprinkled in the NFL.
Yeah, I'll add, and obviously AR himself, Mr. Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones, see how he does in the backup, along with Adonai Mitchell. I did like Adonai Mitchell, another Texas stud wide receiver that they got last year. So yeah, should be some good competition against the ones here, depending on how long they play them for.
Yeah, I feel like Daniel Jones is going to win this starting job unless he gets hurt. Question I have for you, Rob, do you think that Anthony Richardson will be a starter again in this league? Like win a starting job out of camp, not I'm a backup on this team and now I'm going to play 8 games because there are our other starters hurt. But do you see him maybe having a career that looks like, a Geno Smith or somebody else where, you had some struggles, didn't really work in your first system. And then, you take all that athletic ability and put it together somewhere else. Or do you think that he's just a big old fat miss?
Gleaning a little bit here. I think that they are, he had a rough first preseason game for sure. So he's continuing the trend of, what he was coming off of from last year. And I think it's just kind of what his tape was at Florida. I think he got hot for a certain period and he's got supreme athleticism. There's no doubt, but he's just very inconsistent as a passer. So I do think unless Daniel Jones just completely takes over this offense and just looks completely efficient, I think they're going to give the nod to Anthony Richardson. I could be totally wrong here. I'm not a Colts beat writer, nor do I watch too much of the Colts, right? But that would be my guess. But I wouldn't be shocked if Daniel Jones ends up taking this as just what you're going to get out of Daniel Jones, and that might be just a lot safer and a little bit more efficient, than your kind of high risk, high reward Anthony Richardson, 70-yard bombs to the house type of player that he's been so far.
And the AFC South is an interesting division because, I don't trust the Jaguars at all. I know that they've got Travis Hunter now and, Trevor Lawrence is
Liam Cohen and Travis Hunter? No?
I don't know. I'm going to have to believe it to see it. It's kind of like a couple years ago when the Browns came off their good season and there's all this hope that the Browns have turned the corner. I don't know. I'm going to have to see it from the Jaguars. The Texans did not really live up to the hype that they had last year. Now, I do think the Texans are the best team in that division, hands down, and I do think that they're going to have a little bit stronger of a year. They've restocked their wide receiver core a little bit. And, CJ Stroud will probably have even if it's just a slight bounce back year, Texans are going to be good. But
And then the Titans are really interesting with Cam Ward and
They're not gonna be competitive, I don't think. That's just my opinion. Like maybe the Titans are like a 6-win team, but my point is like I think the Colts maybe will lean into Daniel Jones because they're like, we could win 10 games with Daniel Jones and find ourselves in a playing for the division or a wild card spot.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I guess I'm not that big of a Daniel Jones believer from his time with the New York Giants, but you never know. Like I said, AR brings a lot of high risk, high reward type of play. So, he could get hot here again. Things could start to click for him, and that'll lead up to a lot of points for that offense if he could really put it all together. And if he just gets his timing correct with his wide receivers, his deep ball has got to be one of the best in the game if he can actually connect. We saw that in his first year, which is why he kind of took off and was a massive fantasy player, right? But yeah, I totally understand that. I definitely think that the Texans are going to take control of that division. In my opinion, I think the Titans will be fun for sure, young and interesting. I'm not sure how many games they'll win, but Colts, yeah, if they put it together, I love their head coaching. I love some of the pieces that they have on defense and on offense. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor, our old Wisconsin Badger, love him. So definitely be interesting to see though. But I'd give the nod to AR instead of Daniel Jones, but that's just my opinion.
Well, we'll see how it plays out. That's the fun thing, about sports and us being on here is that, we get to talk about it. We get to make some guesses and we get to see that play out in the regular season and see how it goes. I will say I can't remember exactly how the Colts rebuilt their offensive line or how well a job that they did do with that, but they did lose some pretty substantial pieces up the middle. So AR is going to have to use those legs to maybe escape that inside pressure. Basically, the Vikings they stole the Colts' interior offensive line. So
Yeah, well, they're going to have a former Badger, Tanner Bornolini, at center, I believe, with Matt Goncalves at right guard and Braden Smith at right tackle. Of course, they got Quentin Nelson. They're all pro at left guard, right? But yeah, it will be interesting to see how Tanner Bornolini does for sure.
forgot about him. I really liked him in the pre-draft process, not just because he was a Badger, but I thought that he was a great mid-round pick, somebody that a year ago I was thinking that would be a great guy to draft and develop and sit for a year behind Josh Myers, and then maybe we wouldn't have had this whole Elton Jenkins transition here now. Instead they took Jacob Monk. I don't know if Bortolini, I think he was drafted before that selection anyways, before Monk, but that's kind of what we're looking at now. So anyways, enough rambling about the Colts, the AFC South, Anthony Richardson. If you made it this far, you're definitely a football junkie. But yeah, we should probably wrap it up and let people get excited for the early afternoon game here. The Packers are going to play against the Colts.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for coming back and taking a listen to us. Let's go Packers. I know I'm sure that they're going to come a little bit with some more energy, a little bit more prepared in the details and execution. I'm kind of betting and banking on that. So be a really exciting second preseason game, and we're even closer to the start of the season, which is pretty crazy. So thank you, everybody, for coming back and taking a listen to us. Make sure to share with your friends, family, and other Packers fans. We are on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We do have new episodes every Wednesday and Saturday. We are also on the socials. I'm at Sounds Gouda with 3 A's, and Jordan is at Wilson Jordan. But until next time, Packers Nation, we hope that you have a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good night. Go, Pack, go.
Been wanted this shit